On this edition of the Humble Skeptic Podcast, I'd like you to hear a story of a friend's descent into darkness. For 2 years, Stephen Flo was inexplicably filled with fear, anxiety, and despair. And as a result, he retreated from the world, away from the company of friends. In fact, he even began to hate sunlight, and in vampire-like fashion, kept all of his curtains closed, and lived in what felt like a tomb. What's particularly fascinating about this story is that though Stephen Flo was a Lutheran pastor, he even began to despair about his own eternal state. If the gospel was true, it was true for others, but not for him. And when friends tried to comfort him, it only made him feel all the more condemned and abandoned by God. Can this story be explained naturally, or is there perhaps a supernatural component? I'll let you be the judge. But on this program, you'll be hearing from Pastor Stephen Flo himself.
Faith is believing in something you can't see, you can't feel, something that can't be proven.
Then how do you know which is the right faith?
I think that's a gut thing.
I don't think about a right faith. I think about what resonates with me. I feel authentic. It brings me peace.
I think there is no absolute truth in any religion. I think it's a matter of subjective experience.
I kind of just trust my intuition, trust my gut.
You just know. You just gotta follow it.
You just gotta follow what you think is your faith.
If faith is blind, then what makes one belief better or worse than any other? And if it's just a leap in the dark, why should any of us feel obligated to believe anything at all? My name is Shane Rosenthal. I was raised in a Jewish home, but became an atheist at a very young age. Later, as I began to question things, I ended up losing faith in my atheism and converted to Christianity. Since that time, I've never stopped asking questions, and I've spoken with authors and scholars from all over the world in order to explore the beliefs and ideas that shape our lives. Over the years, one thing I've concluded is this: we're all believers. But because there are so many conflicting ideas and worldviews out there, we just can't all be right. So how do we find the truth? On this podcast, we'll start by asking questions.
I'm really just trying to figure out what I believe right now.
Hey there, welcome to another episode of the Humble Skeptic Podcast. I'm your host, Shane Rosenthal, and on this program I'll be talking with Pastor Stephen Flo about his experience in hell. Well, that's the way he describes it, but I'll let him tell the story. Pastor Flo, thanks for joining me for this conversation.
Thank you for the opportunity.
So, you are currently a retired pastor, but I'm wondering if you could tell our listeners a little about your background. How long did you serve as a pastor? Which denomination did you serve in, and where did you minister? That kind of stuff.
Yeah, I was a pastor for 30 years. I came out of seminary in 1990 and took a call at Grace Lutheran Church in DeSoto, Missouri, a small congregation, maybe 150 members or so on paper, and I was there for 30 years.
Were you raised in the faith?
Yes, I was raised as a Lutheran in the American Lutheran Church in southern Minnesota, and then it became the Evangelical Lutheran Church of America, and I started to see how liberal they were becoming and getting away from scriptural authority. So I finally left it and then joined the Missouri Synod when I was living in Seattle, Washington.
What led you to choose the calling of pastoral ministry?
Well, that's interesting. I resisted it, and the last thing in the world I ever wanted to do was be a pastor. I had the highest regard for pastors, but I've never felt comfortable in public speaking. I could talk to you in a small group all day long, talk to people on the street. I'm very comfortable with people, very social. But for some reason, standing in front of people and being the only one talking has always gone against my flesh. But I was so overwhelmed by the wonderful gospel. Objective justification, I'm sure you've heard that term.
Yep.
Well, that was something I never had clear growing up. I was growing up thinking Jesus loves us and forgives us, but you got to have faith. And I'm not sure my faith is strong enough to keep me in this relationship. So I was always kind of struggling with that thought through my years growing up and then college. And then I finally went out to the Lutheran Bible Institute in Seattle, Washington. And I was expressing my faith to a professor privately. And he was saying, hey, do you think that God loved you and forgave you before you had faith or only after you had faith? And I said, after, right? He says, I've got some really good news for you. Jesus loved you and forgave you from the cross before you were even born. That message of your reconciliation, your redemption, that he forgave you from the cross, it's 100% finished. That message actually creates your faith. And I just thought, wow, I'd never heard that clearly taught to me before. And that was just lifting a whole ton of weight off my back. I was having a Luther experience, the Tower experience.
I had a friend who said, he was raised in a kind of a Baptist environment where it's all about you, your piety, your decision. And he said that something clicked when someone told him that he was actually saved 2,000 years ago just outside the center city of Jerusalem.
Yes. It took me out of the equation for the first time in my life.
Yeah.
And that was the most liberating thing in the world to hear, that it was 100% God saving me by grace alone and keeping me in the faith too, not just getting it started, but keeping me in the faith. It's 100%, by grace alone. So it was just so wonderfully liberating. I couldn't stop thinking about it. I started a little theological interest group at the Lutheran Bible Institute. I worked there as an admissions counselor, and I was just getting so excited and talking to others. And then seminary opportunity came along, and I thought, well, I don't want to be a pastor, but I've got to learn more about this great theology.
Yeah. When I first met you, you told me an amazing story about something that happened to you a few years ago while you were still serving as a pastor. Can you tell this story starting from the very beginning? What was the first thing that happened to you that seemed out of the ordinary?
Yeah. Okay. So in October of 2019, I was in my house and I was taking a picture of a sunset on my outside deck. And as I went out to the deck, I felt like I was going to faint. And I thought, I must have stood up too fast. Got my pictures, walked in the house. And then 5 minutes later, my heart started to beat uncontrollably, just really fast. And then I almost fainted. And then I got over it. And I thought, what in the world is that? And so then another 10 minutes later, it happened again. So I called my son, who's a doctor in medical school. Now he's a psychiatrist, but he was going through medical school at the time. And I told him what's happening. He says, you've got to get to the hospital right now. This is really serious. So my daughter took me over, and I was having these episodes on the way over, and I got to the hospital, and they hitched me up, and boy, they were really concerned. I say, okay, I feel it coming on. Look at the monitor. And they all looked at the monitor, these doctors, and they were amazed at the kind of loops they were seeing on the monitor indicating this heart fibrillation or whatever I was having. Later on, I found out that the loops that they were looking at, they call those tombstones because most people die from that.
Wow.
That kind of looping that I was having on their monitors. And a doctor that was in charge came over to me and I said, hey, what happens if I just totally faint? Will I come back? And she says, well, I'll tell you what, be serious with you. We got cold blue going on here, and we're going to have to shock your heart back, and not everybody makes it. So this is very serious. But as time went on, they were able to get it under control with some medications, and they decided to send me up to St. Louis to St. John's Hospital. And they said that I had some kind of what's that called, ventricular tachycardia. So they thought it would be good for me to have an ablation done, where they go up through an artery and they ablate certain parts of the heart, either freezing or burning little nerves that they think might be causing that irregular heartbeat. So they did that, and that was successful. And they said, you'll be able to get up and go back to work in a week or two. But after I had that, I didn't just bounce back. I was kind of solemn for a month, in no mood to go back to work. I was just totally solemn. And then after that first month, then in getting to the second month, then I went into a real deep depression. I just couldn't go outside. I didn't want to be in a car, going anywhere. I had such fear over everything. I couldn't talk to people, and I normally love talking to people, and I love people. I couldn't talk to people. I couldn't answer the phone. I couldn't have the TV on, the radio. I had to have all the curtains drawn. Couldn't stand sunlight. I mean, we were just living in a tomb.
And what was going on in your head during that time? Like, was it darkness and despair? Were you hearing things? What was happening inside your head?
Yeah, I wasn't hearing things, but I was. It was a doom and gloom kind of thing. And even though I've been preaching the gospel my whole life and giving a lot of people comfort, I knew God's word was true. I knew his gospel was true, and it applies to me. I knew this rationally. But it was just like there was a cutting off of my ability to receive any comfort from it at all. I knew things intellectually were true, but could not receive any comfort. Just impossible to receive any comfort. And another pastor I told this to, he said, "You're having a Psalm 88 experience." And I never really looked at Psalm 88 before, but it's the darkest psalm in all of the Psalms. And it's
Is that the one that ends with "The darkness is my closest friend"?
I think it is.
Here are a few lines from Psalm 88 from the New International Version. I am overwhelmed with troubles. I am like one without strength. I am set apart with the dead, like the slain who lie in the grave, whom you remember no more. You have put me in the lowest pit, in the darkest depths. I am confined and cannot escape. My eyes are dim with grief. I call to you, Lord, every day. Are your wonders known in the place of darkness, or your righteous deeds in the land of oblivion? Why, Lord, do you reject me and hide your face from me? Your wrath has swept over me. Your terrors have destroyed me. All day long they surround me like a flood. They have completely engulfed me. You have taken from me friend and neighbor. Darkness is my closest friend. So then how did you negotiate, you have pastoral responsibilities and yet you're going through this severe depression? Did you take time off, or did you actually have to fill the pulpit during that episode?
Oh, no, you couldn't get me in that pulpit at all. I was way too sick. And it was so severe. It wasn't just inward. It was also, I felt physiological effects. I felt like there was a metal band around my head, squeezing my head 24/7, like migraine kind of stuff. And then on my body, from my waist up, felt like I was at like 200 feet underwater, pressure all around me, and I felt like I was being squeezed to death. So I was having both inner and outward sensations. But I went to the emergency hospital 3 different times, and each time it was, "I can't find anything wrong with you." And if that isn't disconcerting, when you're feeling like you're dying and nobody can detect anything wrong with you.
Right.
And then I was going to doctors. My wife was hauling me to different doctors, to psychiatrists, psychologists, to functional doctors, naturopathic doctors, just one thing after another. No help. I was giving up on doctors. My wife never gave up. She actually saved my life because she never gave up.
But I'm sure it was probably hard for her to get you in the car.
Oh, my goodness. Yes, exactly right. But she's persistent, so.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So was there a period there where you began to wonder, have you been abandoned by God?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I felt that way very much. I knew from Scripture, from preaching Scripture for so many years, that it wasn't true, but you really, all your feelings tell you that God's nowhere to be found. You're rejected, you're condemned, and if you died, you go to hell. It's just bizarre.
But that wasn't like an audible voice. It was more like this subjective despair. It was a feeling that you were abandoned and reprobate and all that.
That's right. It was very much of a feeling. At first, I thought, well, certainly if I died, I'd go to heaven. And so I was actually having suicidal ideation at first, thinking if I'm out of this world, I could go to heaven. Before I could never understand the thinking of a person who's suicidal. But in this situation that I was in, you're in hell. And you feel like anything would be better than the hell that you're in, and you just want to get out. Or you're like World War II, you're in a battle, and you're caught under a tank that's burning, and you are burning to death, and you're begging somebody to shoot you or give you a gun so you can shoot yourself. That's kind of like what it's like. And I had acute depression. This isn't just some minor depression. And when you have acute depression like that, there's nothing that anybody can say or do to make you feel better. There has to be a chemical change in your brain for there to be any hope for you at all. And the psychiatrist I was trying to explain that to my son who was going through psychiatry school. And he came back one day, he says, you know what, Dad, you're right. I said, I'm right about what? We just had a big conference, all these big psychiatrists around the country were talking, and they were saying, when we deal with people that are depressed, if they're into the acute stage, all this talk about, cognitive behavioral therapy and talking things out and getting out, exercising, eating right, and all this stuff, it doesn't mean a thing. It won't work. You have to have a change of chemistry in your brain because that's what's at stake. This is a chemical thing going on.
Had you ever, like in that state of mind, had you ever come to the point where you thought it might not be natural and chemical, but that it might be a supernatural kind of a thing?
Yeah, it's funny. I went to a functional doctor once and he said that to me. He says, have you ever thought you might have a demonic experience going on here? And it just caught me by surprise, but not really, because I was thinking, I'm going through, I know it's a chemical thing and all at one level, but I thought the devil's right there too. It's like when you're in a real weakened state, then it becomes also a spiritual attack. The devil's like a wolf, and he's able to pick out in a herd the weak ones and go after them. And boy, if you're not in a weak state in this situation, I don't know what weak is. So the devil was after me. And so it's very much a spiritual attack as well as a mental and physiological attack.
And so did you consider calling an exorcist?
Oh, yeah. If I thought for a second that would have worked, I would have done that. But I had my pastor come, the guy that was filling in for me, he then became the pastor, and he would come and give me communion, and I would take that. But I could barely sit there long enough to listen to him talk to me because I was so under distress. But I never felt any comfort in any way, shape, or form. And I never thought of asking him to do an exorcism, but yeah, that's an interesting question. You don't hear too much of that kind of practice in the Lutheran Church, but it may be something we might want to consider.
Well, I was just wondering, like, your experience was so dark, and you have the objective means of grace, word and sacrament.
Yes.
And yet you don't experientially feel the benefit of that. You still feel lost, condemned, abandoned by God.
Yeah.
So I can't imagine not beginning to go down that path that this has got to be demonic.
Right.
How long did this go on for?
For a couple of years.
Hmm.
Yeah. And I knew it was chemical because I had tried different SSRIs and drugs they gave me, but they all made me sick. There was one drug that I could take that I could feel normal for about 5 hours, a benzodiazepine. People love those because they actually they do something to your brain and they make you feel normal. So I felt normal for just a few hours. And I was thinking, if that little pill could make me feel normal, this thing's got to be chemical. And
right.
And so then it would wear off. And you can't take these benzos very long because they're addictive, highly addictive. And I think the new opioid problem is going to be with benzodiazepines, I think, because they're so prevalent.
Yeah.
But
Right.
So I would never be able to take those very long, and I was afraid of getting addicted. But I would get a little bit of relief there. Otherwise, I was in hell most of the time.
What was the most unnerving experience you had during that time?
Unnerving.
Something that kind of rattled you and where you really felt that you were in the darkest place.
Oh, man. Well, I actually I was thinking I wanted to kill myself. I walked out in the woods with a gun, and I just couldn't bring myself to use it. And that was a couple of times, just privately. I was doing that. My poor wife had no idea.
Wow.
And I went, wow, this is the crazy thing. I just was so distraught and in so much pain. I drove my car to a bridge along the highway and parked my car there. And I was just thinking of getting out and jumping off that bridge. And some crazy things happened while I was sitting there. I get a call from my mother. She's 90-some years old. How are you doing? And everything, And then I did get out of the car and look over, and I saw a funeral procession going out underneath the bridge.
Interesting.
And then even crazier than that, as I went back in the car, I sat there. There's a 4-lane highway, 2 on one side and the other side. And the other side, the traffic was going the opposite direction. And a car was going by watching me, was a member of our church. She didn't know who I was, but she felt this compulsion to go down the road, turn around, come back, and help that person along the side of the road. They just felt they were compelled to do it. And they came around, she pulled in front of my car, got out, and she came closer, and she was going to ask, can I help you? But she said, Pastor, what's going on? You need some help out here? And I told her that I was so distraught that I was wanting to just jump. She said, don't do anything rash. You just follow my car. And she got me home. She felt a supernatural compulsion, almost like a voice in her head that says, go there and help that person. So, yeah, that was really something.
in hindsight now, you have the experience of being in dark despair. You know the objective truth about the gospel. You feel the comfort in it now.
Yes.
But there was a time in which you felt disconnected from it. And I'm wondering if there's a lesson there for all of us in terms of reading things by our feelings, you know?
Yeah, you can't follow your feelings, that's for sure.
I mean, sometimes you can, like when I feel a certain feeling in my gut, I need to look for a restroom, and that's reliable generally.
That's right.
But there are areas in which the gut is unreliable.
That's right.
Right?
That's right.
What are your thoughts there about counseling people now in light of your experience? How far should we trust feelings?
Yeah, that's a good question. Well, you see, this is the funny thing because I've thought, how can I help people with what I've experienced? Because I've been able to tell people, hey, I know what you're feeling about wanting to leave this world. I know hell on earth. I know what you're feeling as you struggle inwardly. Nobody can really understand that, really, until they experience it themselves. So I can really empathize with them. That's somewhat of a comfort when somebody knows at least you understand their hell that they're in. But don't follow that. Don't carry through with that of leaving this world, because I guess I'm a living example of someone who got healed. And that can happen for you, too. You know, there are new miracles of modern science like TMS, transcranial magnetic stimulation.
That's the technology that you ended up finding some 2 years after your initial symptoms developed. Tell our listeners, like, how did you first stumble onto that potential cure? What is it? And then how did it help you?
Yeah. I first heard about it at Barnes Hospital in St. Louis, and of course I couldn't use it because COVID came in and all the technicians weren't using it at that time. I left the hospital. I went from there to another clinic out in Arizona for 40 days. I call it my 40 days in the wilderness, literally in the desert. But they couldn't help me much either because they just want to give me drugs, which I don't do well with. But they told me about a thing called TMS, the second time I heard about it. But I just wasn't trusting anything at that time. I didn't get it. I came home. My wife started taking me to doctors again. And finally, one doctor said, you know what, we've tried everything. All the drugs don't work for you. There's electric shock therapy, but it's kind of the last resort that helps people. That's kind of severe in some ways because it could affect your memory to some degree. But before that, there's a thing called TMS, and that's the third time I heard about it. And I finally decided, okay, I think I'm just going to go and talk to a TMS doctor, a psychiatrist. So I went and told him my story, and he said, I think we can help you. I said, it's going to take a miracle. And he says, I think we've got a miracle for you. I've seen so many people like your case become totally healed. And I said, well, I'm from Missouri. You're going to have to show me. So, yeah. So I sat down, and they put this little thing that shot a little beam in my head, and they calibrated just right. Looking at my right hand and how it moved when they shot a little beam, and they finally found the right spot. They calibrated that, and every time I came in then for 20 minutes, just 20 minutes a day for 36 treatments. It's a beam, a magnetic beam that shoots into the brain, part of the brain that produces epinephrine, norepinephrine, serotonin, and dopamine. So that part of the brain somehow got changed in some way through all my experiences, maybe with my
cardiac issues.
Yeah. I think the heart and the brain, there's something bigger connections going on than we realize.
Mm-hmm.
So, so then I come in for 20 minutes a day, and they just kind of beep, 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 hit that spot, and I hardly felt it, just a little bit of a tapping. About the fifth treatment, or the fifth day I was there, I started to feel for the first time in 2 years a lifting off of me, this incredible weight and depression and anxiety, just kind of lifting, and I could actually feel a little bit normal, and like the day's going to be okay. For the first time in 2 years, I just cried all the way home. I couldn't believe it. I thought, I'm actually getting healed. And
wow.
by the time the 36th treatment was done, I was totally normal. So I have been just living in pure, I can't believe this. I'm okay now. And I want to get up and live, and I'm happy and back to normal, and maybe even happier than normal. I don't know. Jordan Peterson kind of went through a thing like this. I don't know if you've heard of him. He's a psychologist.
Yeah.
Okay. He went through a hell. He was on medications, benzodiazepines, and so on to deal with his depression. And he got hooked on it, and he went through hell getting off of that. He talked about once getting off of it and getting back to normal, just mundane normalcy, what we all take for granted. That's the greatest gift, just to feel normal. Just wonderful.
Did you say it was 3 to 6 treatments or 36?
36
treatments.
Yeah,
36. Okay. And it was by like treatment number 5 that you started to feel normal.
For me, it was. And some others, it would be somebody else. It might be the first treatment. For somebody else, it might be the last, or even a month or two after they're done with the treatments. It varies for different people, from what I'm told.
And so after treatment number 5, you're starting to feel like you want to hang around people. You want to open the drapes. You know, you're not feeling that despair and rejection by God.
Exactly right. It just all lifted and joy came back. I could believe that God loved me. I could receive a sense of joy knowing that he forgave me my sins. It all came back. And I've just been rejoicing every day since. We've been traveling like crazy because here I'm 69, going to be 70. I got my life back, and now my wife and I were just traveling. We figured the next 10 years, when we get into our 80s, maybe we won't want to travel anymore, but we're just traveling like crazy now because we're having some...
Yeah, I'm calling you while you're on the road at the moment because you guys are still out seeing the world.
Exactly right.
That's awesome.
Yes.
So I'm wondering, what you think about this. As you read through the Gospels, you sometimes get the impression that Jesus is healing people from diseases and their sicknesses, but then also right with it, he's healing people of their demonic possessions. And sometimes the demonic attacks, which, for us as modern Westerners seems a bit weird. We don't typically speak that way in our day.
Yeah.
But sometimes it results in things that we might associate with epilepsy. They're having what looks like a seizure, frothing at the mouth. As a pastor who has preached through many of those kinds of texts over the years, you spent 30 years in pastoral ministry. Is there a connection between demonic activity and illnesses of various kinds?
I don't know. That's a good question. I know for me, I don't think there's we're not talking possession, but we're talking oppression. I really think there was a tremendous oppression going on because I was in a weakened state. When I went to Mayo Clinic, saw 3 or 4 doctors there. One was a psychiatrist. After she heard my story, I had it all written out. She came into the office and she said, "I've been here for 30 years. I've never heard a story like yours." So I had something really exceptional going on. I have to just tell you, she says, we have so much questions still about so many things, even anesthesia. You had anesthesia during that operation on your heart. And maybe that's affected you in some ways that we're not aware of. But we don't have answers really. All we have are some drugs to offer you.
Yeah. I heard a story about someone at Johns Hopkins who said to a graduating class, perhaps as much as 50% of the things that you've learned while you were at medical school is probably wrong.
Yes.
The problem is we just don't know which 50%.
Yeah, that's so true. Yeah, I really believe that's true.
It's interesting that you use the word oppression as opposed to possession, because that word oppression is something that comes up in the biblical text, that Jesus, healed those who were quote unquote oppressed by demons.
Yeah.
And, secularists like to say the demonic is just the ancient superstitious way of explaining what we now know as natural phenomenon.
Yeah.
The problem with that view, though, is that sometimes the quote-unquote epileptic seizure that was described as demonic would sometimes talk back to Jesus and say, "We know who you are."
Yes, exactly right.
And that seems a little different.
Yeah, yeah.
But I do wonder, Jesus was known as a healer, a miracle worker, and an exorcist. And this is acknowledged by secular historians and New Testament scholars.
Yeah.
In light of the really good corroborated evidence that Jesus was a healer and exorcist, and that you and I believe, that he rose again from the dead, and his view of reality is better than our own.
Yeah, yes.
He wins.
He wins.
I don't see a lot of experiences of demons today, but part of the reason I'm convinced of this, I'd love to get your thoughts. Part of the reason we don't see that today, I think, is because of Jesus. He came and conquered the principalities and the powers in a way that kind of banished ghouls and goblins and demons in this part of history in a way that we used to see before the time of Jesus and during the time of Jesus. It kind of came out of the woodwork. But today, because this is an area that he has conquered, it's harder for us to believe in demons because he did such a good job conquering them. What do you think?
Yeah, well, I think that sounds great. I like that. I've never heard that put like that before. I think that makes sense. I do think the devil is active, in other ways as far as unbelief and so on. But not in the same way as it was in biblical times where you just see it so manifest.
And part of my exegetical way of defending that would be sort of the imagery that you see Jesus using when he sends his disciples out and they preach the gospel. He says, I saw Satan fall like lightning from heaven, or that language in Revelation where Satan is bound for 1,000 years. My view of that is it's the church age, and so there is a kind of binding. He's defeating the principalities and the powers. What do you think?
Yeah, I think there's truth in what you're saying there. It could very well be that. And then at the same time, I know that there's a professor at Fort Wayne Seminary, Concordia Theological Seminary, Fort Wayne. It was once a missionary over in, was it Mozambique? Is that the country right next to Africa there?
Madagascar is the big island.
That's the one, Madagascar. And they would go there and see that they had these exorcisms. And this missionary that saw this wrote a book about this. This professor. And then he wrote a second book later on trying to deal with this question of what about here in America? Is that going on here? And what about ghosts and reportages of ghosts? And he thinks that there are demons that do manifest themselves as ghosts here in our culture, but not as prevalent, though, as it was back in Christ's time or even over there in Africa.
Yeah, the borderline between, where Christ hasn't sort of been affirmed, there's still these pockets.
Right. I think some of the miracles that we have heard about, a lot of them happen in the mission field because there's pockets of, demonic hold and people don't know the word, and then the chief is converted because he sees his son getting healed and things like that.
I'm open to the kinds of conclusions that your professor there at the seminary you mentioned. I'm open to the world being weird, and
Yes.
And I'm also open to the fact that my theory may just be one out of 1,000. There may be other better theories that I haven't even discovered yet. But I do think that Westerners tend to discount the supernatural, partly because we have a presupposition that nature is all there is. And even us Christians are tempted to sort of buy into that presupposition, so that we tend to think, especially like in terms of these kinds of encounters, the kind that you experience, we're more than likely to think in terms of natural explanation. And I do think it's possible that there are things that can happen to us, experiences we can have, ghostly encounters that could be weird and supernatural.
Yes, I totally agree with you. And again, I think I was having a physiological problem chemistry-wise, but it really did affect me spiritually as well. I remember going to church feeling so oppressed and so condemned, and hearing, the pastor preach, and everything I heard, even though he was trying to preach the gospel, but everything was law. Even if for God so loved the world, he gave his only begotten Son, that whosoever believeth in him, apparently my belief wasn't working well. I didn't have enough belief. There I'm turning in on myself again, on my faith. And that was enough just to destroy me. I couldn't hardly stand to even hear John 3:16, so it's just overwhelming in that regard. And I think that was demonic. I think the devil's very much active there. And Luther, I think, he always saw the devil in all sickness right there along with that, so.
Well, I mean, if you think about the story of Jesus, some of the language there, he's casting out the sickness, the disease, and the entity.
Yeah.
So I'm wondering if the two sometimes work together.
I really believe they do.
So in one respect, you think that you did have a natural brain phenomenon, but maybe because of that phenomenon, you somehow opened yourself up to demonic forces who, for a time, kind of got the better of you.
Oh, yeah. I really believe that. I really do. I think that's the proper way to view reality, is both physical and spiritual at the same time. It's not an either or, it's a both and.
Wow. That's really interesting.
Yeah.
I had a friend in ministry whose daughter had auditory hallucinations.
Yes.
And I talked to my own daughter, who is a second-year resident in pediatric neurology, and she was telling me that sometimes happens with puberty.
Yes.
And so even there, when you think about auditory hallucinations coming with puberty, well, certainly there's chemistry changing there.
Yeah.
But it's weird, just some of the things my friend was telling me about what the voices were saying. So often it was self-harm.
Yeah.
Sometimes it was satanic and demonic. What you were saying is it makes really good sense to see it as both a kind of physiological and a spiritual thing at the same time.
Yes.
There are issues that can go wrong in our brain and our chemistry physiologically, but sometimes the way that goes wrong can open us up to this other world, and that gets weird and supernatural at times.
Yeah, and I think, isn't it interesting that weirdness, and maybe like you talked about those voices, why aren't those voices just neutral, like you hear a voice that tells you, go out and enjoy the sunshine, do something, something like that. Instead, it moves in a macabre direction. It goes in a direction of, like you say, self-harm or something inappropriate or whatever.
Yeah, you say you had suicidal ideation. Was that what the feeling was inspiring you to do, or just your way of responding, like, I got to get out of here?
Yeah, for me, it was that. It was just, I'm in such hell. I'm in so much pain, and it's constant, and there's no relief. It can't be this bad on the other side. But as time went on, into the second year, I was thinking, you know what? Maybe I am lost. It was getting so long and tiring, this whole thing, and I was starting to think more in the direction, maybe I'm just lost, and that was a frightening thing. And I was maybe a little bit of a preventative to even go that direction, because I was thinking, well, I'll just go from the pan into the fire,
I had a friend who was a pastor in the 90s who had a similar issue. He went through a kind of trauma that caused the onset of depression. And after looking for various cures and seeing psychologists, I think they put him on, SSRIs. And for him, it made the problem worse. His depression, went severe.
Yes.
And he, as a result, ended up taking his own life.
Mm-hmm.
And he wasn't sure whether God loved him anymore. And he was a pastor in the pulpit.
Yes.
I mean, it's amazing to me what depression can do, and why it's so important to highlight treatments like you've been highlighting for our listeners. If anyone in our audience, knows someone or is going through depression, certainly you want to look into TMS therapy.
Yes. Yeah, it's interesting what you're saying about your friend, pastor friend. That happened to me too. Before I had my experience with depression, I had a pastor friend who struggled with depression throughout his life. He had some suicidal ideation when he was young. But anyway, I remember him telling me one time, as I was trying to give him the gospel, he says, that gospel, I just know it's for everybody. I just don't feel that it's for me. But he just couldn't feel it. And it was just like he felt nothing but condemnation. And I was thinking at that time in my mind, I didn't say it to him, but I was thinking, how could he say that? Maybe he doesn't have faith. Maybe he's rejected God. It made me wonder, is he a Christian or what? I wasn't judging him properly, because then when I had my experience, then I started realizing, wow, this is what he's experiencing. It's for everyone else but you. You're totally not able to receive any comfort at all. And you wonder if you're even a Christian. But he was a Christian, and I was a Christian when I went through it. I was in God's hands. He was objectively holding me, and yet I felt totally lost. Just because I felt lost doesn't mean I was lost.
Yeah, there's some of those lines in Paul's letters. It talks about Satan blinding unbelievers from the gospel.
Yes.
And he also masquerades as an angel of light.
Yes.
In the book of Galatians, he is a promoter of other gospels.
Yes.
When you look at the horror movies, it's all this kind of blood and gore and scary stuff. That's the fake image that we have of demons and Satan. The real attack is spiritual, and it's centered on creating counterfeit gospels and undermining our confidence in the historic gospel, the one that Christ accomplished himself 2,000 years ago, just outside the center city of Jerusalem.
Yes, that's exactly right. And Christians can go through periods where they're so oppressed that they actually feel like they're totally lost, but they're not. And God's holding on to them, even though they feel like they can't hold on to him. He's faithful, even though we're faithless, because he cannot deny himself. And that really came true to me after I went through this experience, realizing, wow, I was always in God's hands, even though I felt totally lost. My salvation wasn't dependent on how I was feeling about all of this. It was really him holding on to me. And that's got to be a word of comfort for those out there that are listening. If they're going through a real darkness, there's a reality going on above and beyond them. The Lord himself holding them and allowing them to go through the struggle, but still holding them. Luther himself, he didn't think that all suicides were condemned to hell. And so he actually buried somebody in the churchyard that had committed suicide. But he talked about suicide as like a thief or a robber in the woods that comes and just overtakes a person and clobbers them, and they lose their life. And he said, why does God even allow this to happen? And he was saying, this is to show us how strong the devil really is and how weak we really are. And so we all need to realize we're all that weak and could be clobbered like that. And so we need to pray for those going through spiritual oppression and pray for ourselves and our loved ones, So
I think he sympathized for people in that position because he himself experienced a little bit of it.
That's exactly right. And that's now that I've experienced it, I can sympathize and empathize in a much deeper way than I could before, and give words of consolation that, God is faithful, even when we feel faithless.
And what a great story that you have to tell, because trusting and relying on the finished work of Christ, you decide to spend your entire life defending and promoting that. And then you go through this experience where you just don't know anymore if it's true or if you're even a Christian.
Exactly.
And now that you're out through the other end of the tunnel, you realize it didn't ever undermine the reality. You now know, even in your darkest moment, God was still there. It was just something he allowed you to go through,
Yes.
perhaps to help others who were going through it as well.
Yes, absolutely. I think so. Yeah. And to help me see, too, how weak I am and how he's really in control of everything. And having a good day, just feeling normal, this is all a gift from God, just to really appreciate life and feeling normal and being able to function and talk to people. And, oh, man, everything's a gift.
One of the things that psychologists say is gratitude is one of the most important aspects of a healthy mental outlook.
Yes.
And when you're going through a crisis, it's often difficult. But when you get out of yourself and then you realize the big picture, that God is in control, and even the demons and the principalities and the powers have been defeated, God will allow them to do what he wants them to do. But he is still the Lord of history,
Yes.
the Lord of heaven and earth. And he's worth worshiping.
Yes, he very much is. And that God took on flesh and hung on the cross and took all of hell for me and suffered and died and rose again. And we have to focus on Christ and not the unknown God, but the one that's revealed to us on the cross.
Yeah. Do you subscribe to the idea that that line in it's either the Apostles' Creed or the Nicene Creed? I think it's the Apostles' Creed. He descended into hell.
Yeah.
That is basically his time on the cross.
Yeah.
That is where he's experiencing the wrath of God, which is why he says, my God, why have you forsaken me?
Yes, I think that's about right. I would go along with that. Yeah, he certainly understands our suffering. He went through it infinitely more than we've ever gone through it. But we have a suffering Savior who understands anybody that's listening here that are suffering. We have a Lord that has suffered for them and knows their suffering, and he knows how to deliver them in his time, just like I was.
And one of the reasons why it's a story worth investigating if you're sort of outside the faith is that it was written in advance. I mean,
Yes.
Isaiah 52 and 53 tells the story of the suffering servant, and those chapters kind of read like sections of Matthew's gospel.
Isn't that true?
And it was written 700 years in advance.
Isn't that true? I know that's a real point of discussion for those that are talking to those of the Jewish faith.
Eusebius, in his book, Proof of the Gospel, written sometime in the 300s, said, it's so clear that all these things were written in advance. It should be convincing to Jews and Gentiles. Basically, all men should be convinced of these things.
Yes.
And it should stop the mouths of those who say we come to this by faith alone and we just follow like irrational beasts, those, authorities in our lives. And one of the things that he says about that too is, look around. Augustine says this too. Look around at the world. The promises in the Old Testament are not merely what the Messiah would do in suffering on our behalf, but that the whole world would, make their way to Zion.
Yes.
Look around, they say, Augustine and Eusebius say, this is happening. And right now, 2,000 years later, Jesus is the most famous man of all history.
Right. Christianity is the only truly historical religion in the world. It's not based on somebody's vision or something. It's really built in history. How many prophecies are there in Scripture that talk about Christ and born in Bethlehem? And these are proofs that if you're just a rational person, you don't even have to be a Christian. Just look at this. All these different books and the promises and the prophecies, and they're fulfilled in one man. I mean, the odds of that happening are astronomical.
It was actually the Micah passage, Micah 5:2, is one of the key texts that God used in my own conversion. I stumbled on that text as someone who was kind of raised in a secular Jewish world.
Yes.
Out of Bethlehem shall come the ruler whose origins are from everlasting. And I read that as a person who was just kind of investigating the things that some Christians were saying, and it blew me away. And I look at the old Hebrew Bible, the one that has English on one side and the Hebrew on the other, because I'm like, it can't say Bethlehem there in the original Hebrew.
Uh-huh.
And yet, sure enough, there it was. And that text goes on to say, he shall be great to the ends of the earth. So here is the Messiah is going to be born in Bethlehem, and he's going to be, a worldwide, important person. And I'm thinking, I don't know anybody else from Bethlehem who's famous worldwide. But yeah, it's at least a conversation starter.
Isn't
at
that
the very
something?
least.
What a beautiful thing. I'm so glad you were open to truth there. As a rational person, you're open to the truth and not just shoving that out because it's going to be about Jesus.
Well, that is part of the problem that all of us do have to face, because unfortunately, most of us, when we're confronted with a different truth, a different worldview perspective, we tend to just kind of immediately react and push it aside and explain it away.
Yeah.
It's because presuppositions and paradigms do that. I mean,
Yes.
this is not something only known in the worldview categories. It's known in science.
Yes.
Thomas Kuhn's book, walks through this, the structure of scientific revolutions. And this is why I call for humility and a little bit of skepticism, just as long as you are willing to challenge yourself
Yes.
and your own presuppositions.
Yes.
And to take a serious look at the evidence, take a look at the facts. These biblical texts, especially the passage we've been talking about here from Micah or from Isaiah, these are artifacts of the world that the non-Christian has to explain.
Right.
Like, these are parts of their world. We have copies of the book of Isaiah and Micah from the Dead Sea Scrolls that are 200-something years before the time of Jesus.
Yes.
How is it that these things line up so well? And it shows to me that they can't be explained naturally.
Yeah. And in archaeology, of so many things they dig up, it keeps proving the scriptures to be true.
That's right. And even faith, the Greek word was pistis, which is not, a religious kind of thing. It wasn't a feeling. It wasn't this experiential thing. It was just the word that Aristotle and others used for something that was trustworthy.
Yes.
And if something is trustworthy, there's weight to it. Just like the way you trusted doctors. They had knowledge and experience, and you placed your trust in them. Some of them didn't help you. Others did, though.
Yeah.
And ultimately, you trusted someone who came up with a solution.
Yes.
And I'm so glad that you ended up finding an amazing cure in the TMS therapy.
Yes.
And Pastor Stephen Flo, thanks for sharing your story with us.
Thank you so much. God bless you and your podcast ministry.
Folks, thanks for joining me for this episode. If you are interested in learning more about TMS therapy, which Pastor Flo mentioned throughout this episode, I'll include some information about that in the show notes, along with a number of other related resources. Please remember that The Humble Skeptic is a listener-supported podcast, and that one way to help is by upgrading to a paid subscription. A listener by the name of Jeremy recently became a paid subscriber and wrote the following: "Thank you for sharing your careful research in such a broad array of topics. Having spent 14 years in a closed, cultish environment, my world has expanded immensely, first with your work at the White Horse Inn, and now at the Humble Skeptic. My faith has grown substantially because of you, as I have found a freedom to explore what I believe." Thank you so much, Jeremy, for sending that note and for helping to support this podcast. If you'd like to make a one-time gift or to become a paid subscriber via Substack, our web address is humbleskeptic.com. That's humbleskeptic.com. And I look forward to being with you again next time as we discuss the beliefs and ideas that shape our lives.